Okay, we've had a chance to assemble the Electrifly Cirrus SR22, fly it, and we're going to go ahead and take a step back and talk about the build to get you familiar with what we encountered through the process. Now, Rob was responsible for the build. How did the build go, Rob?
The build went according to plan, about like we expected. Today's ARFs, a little more complex, obviously, than a trainer, but yeah, everything went according to plan. There are a few things that I'd like to go over that I encountered in the build itself that I think we should show the viewers, so if they encounter the same problem, they kind of got a heads up on what to expect.
Okay.
First thing I'd like to talk about is the servo extensions in the wing. Something a little different in this plane is the hole in the string that's provided from the manufacturer for pulling the servo extension through is in the trailing edge of the plane. And expect to take a little bit of time on this. This is not going to be a quick hook your servo extension up and pull it through the ribs like a lot of ARFs are. This one took a little bit of time. It's about 20 minutes per wing to get this in through.
To get it weaved through?
Yeah, it's a pretty tight hole. Obviously, the servo extensions themselves are pretty stiff.
Plenty of clearance and stuff, though?
Yeah, there's plenty of clearance. You're not going to run the risk of tearing a rib apart unless you get little rambunctious. Just take your time.
I noticed the extensions were a little thicker gauge.
Correct.
Which that can make it more difficult to weave through the...
They've got a lot of memory from being wrapped up in the package, so they're not going to lay out nice and flat for you. But just take a few minutes, take your time in this step so you don't do any damage to the wing. Nothing that I would consider to be a problem, just something to think about.
Point.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, the next thing I want to talk about is...
up for you.
Yeah, on the inside on the wing, there are anti-rotational alignment pins that we encountered a little bit of problem with. What we ran into was expect a very tight fit on these pins that go into the wing itself. You're going to have to work them in nice and gently into the wing. Be careful not to damage it. These are a tight fit, but you don't want them loose, obviously. But what the problem that we experienced was when it came time to align the wing up onto the fuselage, there was a lot of paint from the manufacturing in the holes. We had to clean the holes out a little bit and make sure you dry fit everything. That's a key here, is to dry fit everything together.
So put your anti-rotation pins in. You say they're stiff.
They're stiff. They're very stiff.
They're a carbon fiber anti-rotation pins. So put those in the holes first. Get them squared up and the right length protruding. And then dry fit in the fuselage.
Dry fit in the fuselage. Don't be surprised if you've got to ream those holes out a little bit in the fuselage to get those to line up.
I noticed you have the reamer on the bench. Is that
yes.
You just use the small reamer to clean
Yeah,
things?
and we just used a small reamer here to clean the holes out. Like I said, don't over ream anything. Don't try to make them too loose because they're in there for a purpose. They're to keep the wing from rotating during flight. Another problem that we ran into, or I ran into in the build, was the hole for putting your thumb screw in didn't line up real well, at least in the model that we got for review. There was a little bit of reaming involved to open that hole up a little bit to get those
retention pins or screws?
Yeah, the thumb screws to line up. Other than that, take a couple extra minutes of care to make sure that that's all lining up. And like I said before, the important thing is dry fit. Don't do anything permanent until you get everything lined up and dry fitted in. Now they suggest that you use a medium or thick CA to glue those anti-rotational pins into the wing. I didn't do that. I wicked in some thin CA to avoid any kind of buildup at the wing root itself so that the wing wasn't pushed away from the fuselage. Other than that, I mean, it was just not uncommon to find them on some ARFs. You just got to tweak things a little bit, make sure that everything lines up good for you. On page 9, you'll notice that it tells you to remove some covering on the tail surface, which is pretty common on most ARFs. This was already done for us at the factory, which was a nice little...
So you cut back so when you put your adhesive in there...
Correct.
You're not gluing the covering,
you're not gluing to the...
Yep.
Exactly, you're gluing the balls.
And that was already cut away?
That was already cut away,
That's handy.
Yeah. Nice. Another thing I noticed on the elevator itself, they give you a pre-bent wire for joining the two halves of the elevator together. One thing that I noticed was the holes were pre-drilled in the elevators themselves, the two halves. The groove was not continued all the way to those holes for the wire to sit flush in the elevator. So there's a little bit of work to do to finish that groove out so you get a nice flush fit where it meets up against a stabilizer. Okay, another thing I'd like to mention are the wheel pants on this plane. Anybody who's done an ARF with wheel pants have noticed that a lot of times clearance is an issue. when you get the wheel pants installed, there's a lot of fine tuning, a lot of filing to get those wheels to rotate freely in the wheel pants. That was not an issue with this model. Like any model that's got a lot of paint done on it, especially this one here, you're going to find that most of your screw holes are going to have a little bit of paint filled in. Just take a few minutes to clean those out. Maybe take a small drill bit, pre-drill them. You don't want that screw to be forcing its way in too tight in fiberglass, especially. It'll want to split and blow it apart. But wheel pants
are a big plus on this.
Very much so.
So landing gear overall was very smooth. And,
very smooth. Not an issue one with binding. That was kind of nice to see. Another section that I want to mention is on the motor mount itself. They do suggest in the manual that you may, depending on the motor you use, which we did use a rimfire brushless motor, outrunner on this, the 10. There is a brass collar that needs to be removed off of this motor in order to get it to fit through the firewall, the motor mounting. What it does not mention that we ran into anyhow on this model is you back the machine screw out, the Allen screw out of the collar that's on there, and they tell you to remove it. Well, we had to apply a little heat, and we just used a little Burnsmatic torch here. I just put a little bit of heat on it, and it just slid right off.
So that's really a specific issue if you're using the recommended 10
correct,
a brushless motor, the rimfire motor.
Yeah.
To pull that collar off, you just apply a little bit of heat because it's heat activated.
Yeah, and it doesn't tell you that in the direction, so you might get that screw loose like I did, and you're sitting there and thinking, oh boy, well, now what do? I don't want to mess the motor up. A little bit of heat, not too much obviously, just enough to warm that, probably a little Loctite that was on there that they applied from the factory, slide it off. Another thing that you'll have to do that I had to do on the 10 was you've got to ream the shaft hole in the motor mount itself, the wooden plywood motor mount. Ream that out a little bit to allow us a little bit more clearance. Just little things that they don't mention in the directions.
So pay close attention to your motor shaft alignment. Make sure everything moves freely before you move on to the next step.
You got it.
Okay.
Yep, that's it.